على الحق أو الثوابت.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen meets with Lebanese officials, including Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who says Muslims are the first victims of terrorism. President Michel Aoun says he will not ink a decree signed by Interior Minister Nouad Machnouk calling on voters to prepare for the upcoming parliamentary elections. And Iraqi security forces push into the southern outskirts of Mosul as U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis arrives in Baghdad on a surprise visit. Saudi Arabia's Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Prime Minister Saad Hariri reportedly held a phone conversation over the weekend. This is according to the Saudi press agency, which says both men reviewed relations between the two countries and the latest regional developments. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has discussed the country's refugee crisis and means of cooperation to combat radical Islam with Lebanese President Michel Aoun. Le Pen urged for cooperation among vigilant countries, adding that Lebanon and France, due to their common history, should become the cornerstone in the struggle against this radicalism. Le Pen and Aoun also discussed the lingering Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon in addition to matters of common interest. She said it is significant that this crisis cannot continue due to its grave repercussions that impact the economy, health systems and other aspects. Le Pen later headed to the Grand Sarai to meet with Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who said Muslims were the first victims of terrorism, which has no religion, he says. President Michel Aoun says he will not ink a decree signed by Interior Minister Nouad Machnouk calling on voters to prepare for the upcoming parliamentary elections in order to avoid the polls being held under the disputed 1960 majoritarian law. In a widely expected measure, Machnouk on Saturday signed a decree calling on voters to participate in parliamentary elections slated for May 21st. The decree, however, has not yet been sent to the Prime Minister and the President, because it was signed 3 days ahead of the February 21st constitutional deadline. The decree calls on resident and non-resident members of the electorate to participate in the polls. Coming up next, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence meets with senior EU officials in Brussels. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. Iraqi security forces have pushed into the southern outskirts of Mosul on the second day of a new offensive to drive ISIL fighters from the city's western half. Iraqi forces backed by jets and helicopters battled their way to Mosul airport as they prepared to take on ISIL's stronghold in the city's west bank. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis arrived in Baghdad on a surprise visit. Mattis, on his first trip to Iraq as Pentagon chief, is hoping to get a first-hand assessment of the war effort. The convoy of Libya's contested unity government chief Fayez al-Sarraj came under gunfire in Tripoli without causing any casualties. His administration says there were no injuries and an investigation is underway to identify the assailants. Sarraj's fragile government of national accord, formed under a UN-backed deal signed in late 2015, has struggled to impose its authority, particularly in eastern Libya, where a rival administration holds sway. Moving on to Europe, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has met with senior EU officials in Brussels to deliver messages of support from President Donald Trump and to reassure allies worried about the new president's stance on Russia and the EU. Trump alarmed EU leaders by endorsing Britain's decision to leave the bloc and by suggesting last month that other states might follow.
And so today it is my privilege on behalf of President Trump to express the strong commitment of the United States to continued cooperation and partnership with the European Union. Whatever our differences, our two continents share the same heritage, the same values, and above all, the same purpose: to promote peace and prosperity through freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And we call upon the European community to join with the United States in continuing to intensify our efforts to counter the threat of radical Islamic terrorism here on the continent. Now, this will require greater coordination and intelligence sharing among EU member states and between the EU and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And let me assure you, the United States is committed to continuing and expanding our collaboration on the collective security of all of our peoples. While the United States will continue to hold Russia accountable, at President Trump's direction, we will also search in new ways for new common ground with Russia, which President Trump believes can be found.
Parts of war-ravaged South Sudan have been hit by famine, according to a government official who says nearly half the country's population would lack reliable access to affordable food by July. Saskia O'Donoghue reports.
Parts of war-ravaged South Sudan are officially in famine, a government official said Monday. They say nearly half the country's population will lack reliable access to affordable food by July. Oil-rich South Sudan has been mired in civil war since 2013, when President Salva Kiir Mayardit fired his deputy. Since then, the fighting has increasingly divided the country along ethnic lines, leading the United Nations to warn of a potential genocide. Many farmers have been prevented from harvesting their crops, and hyperinflation, which reached more than 800% last year, has put the price of imported food beyond the reach of many. Parts of the country have also been hit by drought. According to the UN, famine is declared when at least 20% of households face extreme food shortages, acute malnutrition rates exceed 30%, and 2 or more people per 10,000 are dying per day. Some have no choice but to leave their home country in search of safety and nutrition. Uganda alone now hosts some 740,000 refugees, most of whom have come since last year, says Lutheran World Federation's Jesse Kamstra.
In this year alone, in the first 6 weeks, we've seen over 100,000 people that have arrived in Uganda. So all resources for all agencies are stretched to the absolute max.
Officials in Uganda say their transit and reception centres can only hold so many refugees. Many new arrivals resort to sleeping wherever there is space. It's a reality many of these refugees face every day.
Malaysia has summoned the North Korean ambassador over his accusation that it was conspiring with hostile forces as it investigates the murder of leader Kim Jong-un's half-brother. Malaysia also recalled its envoy to Pyongyang after a spat erupted when North Korean demands to hand over the body of Kim Jong-nam were rejected. More details in this report.
A diplomatic row is escalating between Malaysia and North Korea over the death of Kim Jong-nam. The half-brother of the North Korean leader was killed in Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur International Airport on February the 13th. Malaysia's recalling its envoy from Pyongyang and summoning North Korea's ambassador in Kuala Lumpur. He has accused Malaysian authorities of colluding with external forces over the murder investigation. The autopsy results could be released as early as Wednesday, says Malaysia's health minister. Police have detained 4 people so far and are hunting for 4 North Koreans who fled the country on the day of the attack. Meanwhile, CCTV footage which allegedly shows the assault on the North Korean leader's half-brother emerging on Monday. North Korean officials have tried to prevent Malaysia from carrying out an autopsy on the victim, demanding the body be handed over directly. The row over the investigation putting North Korea at risk of becoming even more isolated internationally.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen meets with Lebanese officials, including Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who says Muslims are the first victims of terrorism. President Michel Aoun says he will not ink a decree signed by Interior Minister Nouhad al-Machnouk calling on voters to prepare for the upcoming parliamentary elections. And Iraqi security forces push into the southern outskirts of Mosul as U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis arrives in Baghdad on a surprise visit. Those are your top stories for today. I'm Linda Tamima. Thank you all for watching.